Good morning. We begin with the class on general anesthetics, part 1. In this class, we shall be mainly concentrating on these following areas: classification of anesthetics, nitrous oxide, halothane, fluorinated inhalational anesthetics. So these are the important questions that are usually asked from the chapter on general anesthetics. So you have already covered the local anesthetics under the peripheral nervous system, and now we'll be beginning with the general anesthetics. So first, we'll have a brief introduction where we'll be discussing about some general facts about general anesthesia, and then we'll come to the pharmacological aspect. So, what do you mean by general anesthetics? These are drugs which produce reversible loss of all sensation and consciousness. So, you can contrast it with local anesthetics. Local anesthetics do not produce loss of consciousness, they only produce loss of sensation, sensory sensation in the local area. In contrast to that, these drugs produce reversible loss of all sensation and consciousness. Then the cardinal features of anesthesia. So whenever we're giving anesthesia, we're expecting some of these effects to occur. That is analgesia, there is loss of pain, unconsciousness and amnesia, that is forgetfulness of the events that are occurring during the surgery. Then muscle relaxation and attenuation of autonomic reflexes like the blood pressure, heart rate and all. So these are the cardinal features: analgesia, unconsciousness and amnesia, muscle relaxation, attenuation of the autonomic reflexes. So when as a layman or as a student, you think about general anesthesia, you only think about the unconsciousness part and you usually miss the other areas. So these are all the features that are part of the anesthesia. Now, what is this balanced anesthesia technique? So this is also often asked for 1 mark or so in the exam, and you should know what is the balanced anesthesia and why it is required. So balanced anesthesia technique is the combined use of different anesthetic agents. So why are we using different anesthetic agent? Why can't we use just one agent? So that is the question. So why is it needed? It is needed because the different types of drugs which are available, they do not have all the cardinal features of anesthesia in one agent. So obviously, if we use one agent solely, we can only sometimes get only analgesia, and sometimes we can get only unconsciousness, or we get it in to different extent. So we use combined drugs. So this is because this will allow us to take the advantage of the favorable properties of each agent. So imagine a drug A, which may be having a good amount of unconsciousness property, but maybe having a little less of the skeletal muscle relaxation property and a more of analgesia and so on. And there will be drug B, which is having more of skeletal muscle relaxation property and less of unconsciousness providing property. So we can combine both these drugs so that we can use the favorable properties of each of these agents. It also allows to decrease the concentration of each agent. So if we are using different agents, we can decrease the concentration of each. Suppose we are using one agent which has got a little bit of an analgesic activity and more of unconsciousness. So we might have to increase the concentration of that agent if we want to really get an analgesic effect also from that agent. So in this approach, when we are using different agents to give us different properties, we can decrease the concentration of each agent. And when we decrease the concentration of each agent, we obviously will minimize the adverse effects also. This is the importance of balanced anesthesia technique. So what is it, why it is used, and what are the advantages? These are the points that you should be telling under the balanced anesthesia technique. Then types of general anesthetics. So they are broadly classified into two types. One is the inhalational anesthetics and the other one is the intravenous anesthetics. So inhalational anesthetics, the drugs directly enter the alveoli and then they reach the blood through the alveolar blood exchange. Intravenous anesthetics, obviously they directly reach the blood. And from the blood, whether it is inhalation anesthetics or intravenous anesthetics, from the blood, they reach the central nervous system and they provide the anesthesia. Then what is the course of general anesthesia? That means when we are giving anesthesia, we usually have the induction period, that is the starting of the anesthesia. Then the patient slowly loses the consciousness by the end of the induction period, and this has to be maintained. This state has to be maintained during the maintenance period, and then there's a recovery period, and finally the patient is awake. So usually the induction of anesthesia is done by an IV anesthetic because it will be obviously faster. Then the anesthesia is maintained by a combination of both IV and inhaled anesthetic, and during the recovery period the action of the anesthetic gets over. Now, what are the properties of an ideal anesthetic? So for the patient, it should be pleasant, it should be non-irritating, it should not cause nausea or vomiting, and the induction and the recovery also should be fast with no after effects. So we should have an agent which doesn't produce too much of a after effects. As far as the surgeon is concerned, the anesthetic that he is using for the surgery should have produced adequate analgesia, provide adequate immobility and muscle relaxation. This is very important because if the patient keeps on moving during the surgery, the doctor will be having difficulty. So it should provide adequate immobility and muscle relaxation. That is, if the muscles are relaxed, obviously the patient will not be mobile. Then it should be non-inflammable and it should be non-explosive. This is mainly applicable if he is using a cautery. You would have seen in surgeries like thyroid surgeries where people use cauteries to and that if you are using a cautery, it is essential that the anesthetic that you're using should be non-inflammable and non-explosive. For the anesthetist who is giving or administering the anesthesia, he should have used an anesthetic which he can easily administer, which is safe, which is not producing any toxicity to the organs like the heart and the lungs and the kidney and all. It should be potent. He should be able to rapidly adjust the depth of anesthesia. That means he should be able to control the anesthesia. The patient should be able to adjust to what depth the anesthesia is reaching, and if it is going beyond a certain level, should be able to revert the patient very fast. So that should be able to make rapid adjustments in the depth of anesthesia, because if the anesthesia depth increases, the patient can even land up in death. That should be adjustable, and obviously it should be cheap, it should be stable, and it should be easily stored. Now, there are complications which can occur during general anesthesia and even after anesthesia. Some of the complications that can occur during anesthesia is respiratory depression, salivation and respiratory secretion. This is the reason why we usually administer a pre-anesthetic medication like glycopyrrolate and atropine, which you have learned in ANS, to decrease the secretions. Arrhythmias can occur, hypotension can occur, aspiration of gastric contents, and that can lead to laryngospasm, asphyxia. And if you're using a inflammable anesthetic, it can even cause fire and explosion. These are some of the effects that can, adverse effects or complications which can occur during the anesthesia. After anesthesia, you can have complications like nausea and vomiting, prolonged sedation. Pneumonia can occur if there has been some contents which has been aspirated during the anesthesia. Organ toxicities can occur, nerve palsies can occur, emergence delirium. Emergence delirium is a phenomena which is like a confused state. While the patient is recovering from the anesthesia, he might behave in a confused manner. He might be having dreams and confused thoughts. It is called as an emergence delirium, and it is only very short lasting. He recovers. It is over within some time. And prolonged cognitive decline. These are some of the complications which can be associated with the anesthesia, after anesthesia. But the most common ones are obviously nausea and vomiting and prolonged sedation. So that is the introduction of for the anesthetic. So that is often not asked much in the pharmacology papers, but sometimes you can be asked about the complications of anesthesia as a additional question in an essay. So that also you have to pay attention. Now next is the area where we really are concentrating from the pharmacology point of view. That is the first type of anesthetics, inhalational anesthetics. So here again, we'll have a very brief introduction to the inhalational anesthetic, some of the concepts we'll be learning first, and then we'll go to the individual agents. So we'll learn about the classification of inhalation anesthetics. So they can be gas, that is nitrous oxide, or they can be volatile liquids like ether, halothane, and fluorinated compounds like isoflurane, desflurane, and sevoflurane. So this is a classification of inhalational anesthetics. Next one is the pharmacokinetics of inhalational agents. So we have learned earlier that the inhalational agents, they reach the alveoli, and from there they have the blood exchange into the blood from the alveoli, and from the blood they reach the CNS. So the final destination is the CNS. Now, how or what all affects what are the parameters, the pharmacokinetic parameters which affects this journey of this inhalational anesthetic to the brain? We will look into that now. So the depth of the anesthesia in the brain or the CNS will depend on these factors. Minimal alveolar concentration. So what is that? It is the lowest concentration of an anesthetic in the pulmonary alveoli, which is needed to produce immobility in response to a painful stimuli in 50% of the individuals. This is a very, it's a definition for, so it's a standard value which is there for all the inhalational anesthetics. So how do you define this? It's the lowest concentration in the alveoli which is required to produce immobility in 50% of the individuals. So every inhalation anesthetic will be having a MAC, and it is actually the measure of the potency of inhalational anesthetic. So obviously a one which is having a lower MAC will be more potent, because only with a little concentration itself you can produce immobility in 50% of the individuals. So the MSC value will be in if the lower the MSC, the more the potent the agent will be. So then again, what will be the next factor? The partial pressure of the anesthetic in the inspired gas. So obviously the higher partial pressure in the inspired gas, you will have a higher depth of anesthesia finally in the CNS. Pulmonary ventilation. So the exchange also matters. So how much is the exchange between the alveoli and the blood? That also will matter. So how much is the amount in the inspired gas? What is the exchange? If the exchange is compromised, again the anesthetic will not reach from the alveoli to the blood, and finally it will not reach the CNS. So again, it is very important how much is the exchange between the pulmonary alveoli and the blood. Next factor is the solubility of the anesthetic in the blood. Now the anesthetic is inside the blood. Now what happens is, higher the solubility in the blood, the slower the induction. That means if the solubility of a drug is very high in the blood, so you require more amount of drug to be dissolved before the anesthesia sets in. So you can remember one factor, like if you are having more space, you require for the induction to begin, the blood has to be saturated. Okay, blood has saturated with the agent. Now, more the solubility means you require more drug to be dissolving, and then only the saturation point will occur. Lower the solubility means it will get saturated very fast, and the induction will begin very fast. So that is the idea. Higher the solubility in the blood, the slower the induction. For example, ether. Ether will be having a slow induction because it has got a higher solubility. On the reverse is nitrous oxide. It has got a lower solubility in blood, so it saturates the blood very fast, and hence the induction will be very fast. Then finally it will reach the tissues. Again, the tissues, higher the lipid solubility, they will more the lipid soluble the agent is, it will reach the adipose tissue for longer time, and this will affect the recovery also. And finally, the cerebral blood flow. So first you see that MAC is there, partial pressure of anesthetic in the inspired gas, the ventilation, the solubility is an important factor. And finally, the cerebral blood flow. More the cerebral blood flow, more will be reaching the CNS, and finally you will have the proper induction in the brain. Then there are some special pharmacokinetic concepts. Again, these are two areas which are often asked in the exam as a definition. So this is called as a second gas effect, and another one is called as diffusion hypoxia. So first we look into the second gas effect. So the first thing is that you already have seen that the exchange of anesthetic from the pulmonary alveoli to the blood will occur at the rate of the minute volume. So you already know that any exchanges will be occurring at the rate of the minute volume. You have already learned what is minute volume in the first year. Okay, so the exchange also between the pulmonary alveoli and the blood will be occurring at the rate of the minute volume. Now, what is the second gas effect? So this point that I have told you, first point you have to remember, and then we'll come to the second gas effect. So second gas effect means you have to, we'll learn it step by step. So in the initial part of the induction, that is first when the anesthetic is administered, the diffusion gradient is from the alveoli to the blood. That means the more amount of drug is there in the alveoli, and from there it is slowly moving into the blood. So the diffusion is from the higher concentration area, that is the alveoli, to the blood, the lower concentration area, the blood. And so what happens in the initial part, the anesthetic agent moves from the higher concentration gradient to the lower concentration gradient, that is from the alveoli to the blood. Now, suppose if the inhaled concentration of the anesthetic is very high, for example, nitrous oxide. The nitrous oxide is an agent which is given at a very high concentration. So what happens if the inhaled anesthetic concentration of the anesthetic is very high, example, nitrous oxide, it will be sucked into the blood independent of the ventilatory exchange. That means it goes to the blood independent of the minute volume. I told you always the exchange occurs at the rate of the minute volume. But if you're giving the drug at a very high concentration, as in the case of nitrous oxide, it will enter the blood at a rate which is higher than the minute volume. This is a property of the nitrous oxide. Now, if we are giving another potent anesthetic agent at low concentration, for example, halothane along with nitrous oxide, this drug also, that is the halothane, also will be delivered to the blood at a higher rate than the minute volume, and the induction will be faster. That is, you are using the property of nitrous oxide to be delivered into the blood at a very high rate to deliver halothane also. Halothane is given at a low concentration. If it is given alone, it will be moving at the rate of the minute volume. But when you are giving it along with the nitrous oxide, it will be also delivered at a rate higher than the minute volume along with the nitrous oxide. And what's the advantage? Halothane is a very potent agent, and when it is delivered at a high rate, the induction will be fast. So you are using the property of nitrous oxide to be delivered at a higher rate to deliver a potent drug like halothane also at a higher rate, so that the induction is faster. This is called the second gas effect. Now, diffusion hypoxia. Now, imagine again, this is seen with the nitrous oxide. When you're stopping or when in the recovery period. Now, what is happening in the recovery period? The nitrous oxide has to come back from the blood into the alveoli. And so what happens? The nitrous oxide, slowly it will come back from the, the nitrous oxide, it comes back to the alveoli. Because it has got a low solubility, it will come back also at a very fast rate to the alveoli. And as soon as it comes, the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli will fall because a lot of nitrous oxide had suddenly come into the alveoli. So the partial pressure of oxygen will be less because the entire space is being occupied by the nitrous oxide. And when the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli decreases, it will lead to hypoxia. And why this hypoxia is occurring? Because of the diffusion of a large amount of nitrous oxide back into the alveoli from the blood. And this is why it is called as a diffusion hypoxia. Now, how do you prevent this diffusion hypoxia? It can be prevented by continuing 100% oxygen inhalation for a few minutes after discontinuing nitrous oxide. So what do? You continue the 100% oxygen inhalation for a few minutes after discontinuing nitrous oxide. Okay, so that is about the introduction of the inhalation anesthetics. Now we go on to the the individual agents. So the nitrous oxide, first one. So I have described each of the agent under some of the common headings. This is not the way you have been told in your textbook, but this way I feel would be much easier for you to remember than following like different points. It will be difficult for you to learn by heart, but this way you can learn it better. So first we will just discuss about general properties. So it's a colorless, odorless gas. And already I've told you it has got two properties of diffusion hypoxia and second gas effect. What are the favorable features? The favorable features are it is non-irritating, it is non-inflammable, and cheap. Okay, so we will just follow these things in as a course of anesthesia. So what are the properties? It is a good analgesic. It has got rapid onset as well as rapid recovery. Post anesthetic nausea is minimal, and there is no significant toxicity on the organs. So it's a good analgesic, but I have not commented about the unconsciousness or skeletal muscle relaxation. Okay, but the property is associated with nitrous oxide. It's a good analgesic. What is the unfavorable feature? It is a low potency anesthetic. That means it doesn't produce as much of an unconsciousness. Then weak muscle relaxation. It can, because it's a gas, it can expand the pneumothorax and abnormal air pockets in the body if they are present. Prolonged exposure can depress the bone marrow. That is, if this gas is exposed for a prolonged time, it can lead to bone marrow depression. But that can occur only to the OT staff who are constantly being exposed to nitrous oxide. Obviously, the patient is not going to be getting exposed constantly. This is applicable mainly to the OT staff. So, where is it used? So it is mainly used as a carrier and adjuvant for other anesthetics. So I told you it has got not much of a potent anesthetic, but is usually like used as a carrier because the second gas effect, it's a carrier for mainly halothane, like where we use 70% nitrous oxide plus oxygen and a 2% of another potent anesthetic like halothane. So the halothane will be delivered at a very higher rate, and the induction can be faster. As a sole agent, it is used only for dental and obstetric analgesia. So where you want only some pure analgesic effect, you don't want the patient to be unconscious, you can use this because it has got a good analgesic property. So in case of dental and obstetric analgesia, where you do not want the patient to lose consciousness, you can use this nitrous oxide as a sole anesthetic agent. Now, next we go to the next drug, ether. It's a volatile liquid. The favorable features are it is cheap, it is very potent anesthetic, good analgesic, it has got marked muscle relaxation. So you can see all the properties, cardinal features of anesthesia are actually there in ether. It doesn't cause much of an organ toxicity. But what is the problem with ether? It has got irritant vapors, it is inflammable and it is explosive. It produces prolonged induction and recovery. What is the reason why? Because of the solubility. It has got high solubility in blood, so the prolonged induction as well as prolonged recovery. It produces a lot of post-anesthetic nausea and vomiting. So now the status of ether is it is used only in resource-poor countries only. And the method by which the ether is used is called as the open drop method. And it is a very complicated method. It can cause burns on the face of the patient. So this is not really used much in the developed countries because we have better options. But yet in countries which cannot afford costlier anesthetics, ether is still being used. Next one is halothane. Now this is very important because this is often asked in your exams also, halothane. It's a volatile liquid. The favorable features, quick and pleasant induction, potent anesthetic, quick recovery with no post-anesthetic nausea, vomiting. It can dilate the bronchi, so it can be a preferred anesthetic in asthmatics. Unfavorable properties, it doesn't have analgesic or muscle relaxant property, not much. It is cardiotoxic. It can sensitize the heart to noradrenaline-induced arrhythmias. It can cause respiratory depression. It can cause hepatitis rarely, and it can cause malignant hyperthermia. So malignant hyperthermia, you already learned when you were learning succinylcholine. So it is a genetically determined reaction due to abnormal ryanodin receptor calcium channel at sarcoplasmic reticulum, as a result of which a large amount of calcium is released. There is persistent muscle contraction, increased heat production. This is a condition which is seen with succinylcholine and halothane. The treatment of malignant hyperthermia is rapid external cooling, bicarbonate infusion, oxygen, and the drug of choice is IV dantrolene sodium. This is a peripherally acting skeletal muscle relaxant, the IV dantrolene sodium. So where is halothane used? Halothane is used for both induction as well as maintenance of anesthesia. So if you're asked a short note on halothane, you are supposed to be writing these two slides which I have shown you. Next, we go to three more drugs, that is the fluorinated anesthetics. So the three drugs which I'm going to discuss now are the fluorinated anesthetics. And if you get a short note on fluorinated anesthetics, you're supposed to be writing about these three drugs which I'm going to discuss now. So the most popular fluorinated anesthetic is the isoflurane. It has got rapid induction and maintenance. Post-anesthetic nausea and vomiting is minimal. However, it is pungent and therefore it is not used for induction. Though it has got a rapid induction, it has got a pungent flavor to it. So that is why it is not preferred for induction. It can cause fall in BP, tachycardia, and it can cause prominent respiratory depression. So mainly it is used as a maintenance anesthetic in neurosurgery. So we are not preferring it for induction because of the pungent nature, as well as it can cause this fall in BP and heart rate and all, and respiratory depression. So we are just using it to maintain anesthesia, especially in neurosurgery. Next one is desflurane, which is again a fluorinated congener of isoflurane, but it is 5 times less potent than isoflurane. It also has got a rapid induction and recovery with less post-anesthetic cognitive or motor impairment. And therefore, the patient can be discharged fast. So this is one of the advantage. It has got a very rapid induction as well as in recovery. And there is nothing that is persistently, the patient will not be having any cognitive impairment. So the patient becomes roadworthy very soon. That is, the patient can be discharged very fast, doesn't have any significant organ toxicities. Unfavorable features, it is got pungent, it can cause coughing and laryngospasm, and it can cause tachycardia. So we do not prefer it for heart disease patient. So this is a drug which can be used for as an alternative to isoflurane for routine surgery. However, it is preferred for daycare surgeries because of the rapid induction and recovery property. Then we have got sevoflurane, the last one, which is a polyfluorinated anesthetic. Again, its properties are somewhere intermediate between the isoflurane and desflurane. So if you have to arrange as per the potency, you have isoflurane first as the most potent one, sevoflurane is in the middle, and desflurane is the last one. The favorable features, it is not pungent, it is having again a fast and smooth induction as well as recovery. This is acceptable to pediatric patients and doesn't have much of a organ toxicity. The unfavorable feature that can be quoted is its high cost. So it is again used as an outpatient, as an inpatient surgery for induction and maintenance. So isoflurane, because of its pungent induction and all and hypotension factor, it is mainly preferred for maintenance, though it has got a fast induction. Again, desflurane for both, preferring it mainly for daycare surgery. Sevoflurane, high usage in the case of pediatric patients for both induction and maintenance. So we'll continue with the class later on. In this session, the areas which we have to concentrate is mainly the classification of inhalational anesthetics. Then you have to know the properties, especially the diffusion hypoxia and the second gas effect. And as far as short notes are concerned, you have to mainly concentrate on halothane and fluorinated compounds. These are the areas which can be asked from your this area in the exam. Thank you. So we'll continue it in the next part.